Hi, I'm Bob Tassion. Thanks for being here. What's coming up is video number 4 from the 10-part series of the Hermle autocorrection course that I have up at learntimeonline.com. I didn't add any animations to this video like you saw in the previous video that I have up here, video number 3, because it just wasn't necessary. This is a teardown disassembly video, and no animation needed. So what you're about to see is William Porter uh, just doing a great job with his film work again and his instruction. So I hope you enjoy it. Thanks.
Okay, before we move on, we want to let down the power in all of our mainsprings so we don't ruin anything. Okay, power's down. Now, if your hammer assembly happens to be on the bottom of your movement, which it could be, then it's good to take that off right away and you can get your barrels out. Otherwise, that apparatus, that mechanism can get in the way of doing that. This one, they'll come right out, but we'll start with disassembling our hammer assembly. First thing I want to look at is our linkage back here. Let me turn this way. First thing we want to look at is our linkage, our hammer lifting piece here, and we'll remove that. And that'll come right off that linkage and disengage that side of it. Quick inspection. Sometimes these wear a groove in here, so you have to polish out if you can. And then we can take our assembly off. Now I like to treat these type of assemblies as one piece. Instead of taking it apart on the movement, I'll take the whole assembly off and then pull it apart after it comes off the movement. I noticed this nut down here was loose already. That was from me toying around with it. A lot of times these screw heads are a little bit different from the front to the back. So this one is got a thicker head on the screw, and I want to make note of that. And then of course loosen that nut a little bit. I'll show you these screw heads, the difference. See the thickness difference there. Okay, thin ones in the front. Now, loosening our nut back here allows us to spread this plate apart a little bit. And and then it'll come right off of there in one piece, just like that. Make sure it stays together for now. Okay. We have our intermediate drive wheel here. Pull that off. Give it a look. Set that off to the side. Now notice, as we disassemble this, that I'm not using a marker or scratching any marks on any of the wheels or anything else, because it's unnecessary. All of this that we're dealing with here on this movement is adjustable, and we'll be able to change that. Nothing has to be put on exactly the same way, since we can make the adjustments. Now we'll take off our intermediate our drive wheel here, loosening that screw and just pulling that off of there. Now as we go taking these type of wheels and cams and things off of our movements, then what can happen is when these screws are tightened up onto the arbors, it could pull up a burr on the arbor. Can't quite see that. If a burr gets pulled up, then what we're going to want to do is take a fine stone and stone off that burr ahead of time. By taking care of that ahead of time, if we were to pull this arbor through the plate and it had a big enough burr on it, it would score our pivot area, and we don't want to do that, especially if we're not putting a bushing in that area. So okay, now I'm going to take our barrels out. Pull off our ratchet wheel. Now sometimes it'll stick to our arbor or winding arbor. Pull that whole thing right out of there. Just like that. And then these wheels will come right off. And pull our barrel out carefully, noting which size barrel is in what spot, and possibly even double checking to make sure that it's the proper one in there in case somebody has changed it. Okay. Now, what I like to take off, if I'm able to, is our shutoff lever. On the triple chime movements, this lever will be your shutoff lever, but it'll also be your pin barrel adjusting lever, and it will slide your pin barrel off to one side or the other. We'll take this one off, and then we'll take a look at one of those. I like to put this lever on last if I'm able to, because it usually gets a little bit of grease underneath here and up over here. This has a tension washer. You can see that that's cupped a little bit, and a shouldered screw, which will allow you to tighten this screw up tight, and then this washer will give you some tension on there, so when you move your lever, it will stay where it's put. Set those aside. And then, now that our barrel's out of there, it's a little bit easier to get a hold of this E-clip and pull that out. Use a little bigger screwdriver on that. Good time to mention that you can get several different sizes of these E-clips. This is a medium size. So just noting that that's going to go on there will help in the future. And then this little washer, which goes on there, right there. Now that lever can come off. You can get that out of the way. Now, as I continue through disassembly, I basically just take the most prominent piece off and work my way down. In order to get certain pieces off, you have to do that. In our reassembly, we may not go in the same order or opposite order that we've taken it apart. So we're just going to start here with our rack. And pull that off of there. Inspecting our rack. We have our rack teeth. And we have our rack tail. This is the part of our rack that hits the snail and stops it at a certain point to count off the hours. Set that aside. Now we have our rack hook, which also has our strike locking lever here. Now to see when our control cam following pin hits our larger bump here in our fourth quarter, it lifts our chime locking lever, which also has a detent here for the strike warning, and a little detent here that's going to lift our rack hook out of the way to drop the rack. We'll see a little bit more of that when we get it set, when we're setting it up. But you'll see as this lever goes up, it hits this part of our rack hook locking lever here and moves it up out of the way, just like that. So that's when this control cam follower pin goes over the large bump here. Now on some other movements, it's not, these control cams, and we'll see those later, are round, so they don't have this extra bump. All of the releasing of the rack comes from lifting all the levers higher. So all that function would just happen all at once. Anyway, we'll see that later. But, let's take our rack hook off. Pay attention to these springs, that they don't go flying around the shop or get lost in the cleaning process. Which brings up a good point. These levers, if this movement has been sprayed down with oil, which seems to happen often when I get them in the shop, they've been mistreated, or somebody has oiled those posts, there's going to be sticky oil in there. So you want to make sure you get those cleaned out. I'll run them through the ultrasonic tank, but I'll also go through them by hand to make sure there's no sticky goo in there, and that way they will function properly. All right, now I'm going to take off I'm going to leave the chime locking cam and the control cam for now, because sometimes they're hard to get off. With the set screws to the arbor, it may pull up a burr, just like we were talking about, and we might have to pry those off. So if we take our auto correction hook off, that will slide right off of there if it's in the right spot. Let's move it to the right spot. Okay. Okay, and that comes off. And then our chime locking lever. This is the control cam following pin here. And then on this end is our strike warning detent when our strike train goes into warning. And then this detent here for lifting our rack hook up and away from the rack. Okay, now we can take off our control cam. Okay, just the one on that one. Sometimes they have two set screws. Okay. We'll check the smooth. See, make sure it's smooth. No burrs. And if there are burrs, if there happens to be a burr, a piece of hard Arkansas, a very smooth stone, just to take the burr off. You don't want to remove a lot of material. It might cause it to malfunction. Okay. Now our chime locking cam can come off. This one's loose. Okay, let's see if that pulls right off of there. One's on there a little bit. Okay. And there's our chime locking cam. All right, checking for burrs on this surface here. Since our locking levers have to ride over that. Okay. One thing I failed to show you is the back side of our control cam. Here's the back side. Whoops, that's the front side. Here's the back side. This is our auto correction cam here. As we were talking about our auto correction cam follower, drops lower, that's the slot it drops in. Okay? Alright. Now we can take off our lifting piece. We also want to note this little spring on here. Little tension spring that allows us to snap back after it goes over our lobe. And we'll talk about how to set that up later. Okay, that comes right off. Checking our detents for any burrs or anything. This is our little steel pin. It's a beveled piece right here that our center cam picks up our lifting piece, and then if you were to turn your hands backwards, it would slip over that beveled piece and allow you to turn your hands backwards on these movements. I hope you can see that. Okay. Now, what we have left here is our gathering pallet. I like to put, maybe I've already mentioned these, I can't remember. Put something down to keep that from marking the plates, keep your levers from marking the plates. Once again, getting these up in there. Now, one thing to pay attention to here is our pin, our rack lifting pin right here, that little pin. We don't want to push, if that protrudes through the back side, which it sometimes does, we don't want to push the pin out. So situating our gathering pallet in a certain position so we don't do that. Putting our pry bars all the way up to the arbor on both sides, opposite sides, and then a nice even downward pressure, and that'll loosen that right up, and it'll come right off of there, just like that. All right, once again, check the surface. Now we have our center cam to take off. I think it's important to remove all pieces in order to get underneath these and get the gunk out of there, to, if you have to possibly put a bushing in. For a proper cleaning, you have to take these off. So we're going to look at a cheaper way of getting that off, but it is important to take it off. What I have here is little pieces of wood. Might be cedar. I think it's cedar. Maybe pine. You can use any kind of wood you want. Different thicknesses, as you can see. In pulling this center cam off, of course, using some pry bars. Now, I mentioned my paint can openers. You can buy an expensive set of pry bars, or you can make them out of screwdrivers, things like that. You'll have to bend them. If you had these lever pieces longer, you may get more height out of something when you pry it up. Main thing is not to mark anything all up. Throwing our guitar picks on here. Now also, you see, we're going to do this with everything apart, which you certainly can. But when you disassemble your plates, you're going to have to disassemble this way, because if you were to pull this plate off the other plate, you're going to capture some of the other wheels and things like that. It'll be hard to get apart. So you want to set your plates up this way so your center wheel is attached to the plate you're removing from. Anyway, you'll figure that out if you do it the wrong way. Now, we could definitely take this off at this point instead of taking it off earlier. We'll get our guitar picks under here, and I want to pry this up. Now, I don't have enough space here to get underneath of that, so I'm going to have to be very gentle and get something under here first. Okay, and just to get that started so I can get my protection underneath that cam. Okay, just a little bit. Now we can place these underneath to give us some protection of the plates. Okay, get under there. Paying attention where I pull this, I don't want to pull on the end of our lobes because those will bend easier, especially if that thing is stuck on there. Now we'll pull this up, and as you can see, my pry bars are all the way down the plate. So now I use my little blocks of wood, and I can work my way up by using these blocks. Okay, too tall. Let's put in a medium size block here. Being careful not to bend the arbor and working our way up. Okay, that's still on there. We're going to have to block that up higher. Even steady pressure. Still on there. We'll layer a block on top of there. Okay, we've worked our way up. There, center cam will pop right off. Good way of doing that if you're careful, inexpensive. They also have commercially made center cam pullers. I made one myself. That is a little bit of an apparatus, but this one here gets under that center cam nicely, or any other sort of cam, and fits in there, and allows me to pull that straight up and off. And it will lift that cam straight off. straight up so that you don't bend the arbor, which is easy to do on these. Nice and slow. Sometimes if they're sprayed down with oil, old WD-40 got all gummy and sticky in there, you might have to use some sort of agent to soak in there for a little bit so it'll come off easier. Okay, there's our center cam. Once again, we'll check for burrs. Want to make sure I didn't put any burrs on it when I pulled it off. Make sure it's still in the flat, which it is, and it's in good shape. Okay, there's our chime mechanism removed. Okay, we're going to take apart the plates. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the movement over and do it, and you'll see why later. But in order to do that, I'll have to take the nut off of this side. And then transfer my feet to the other side. And you'll see why in a little bit. The reason is I'm going to put my center cam back on my center arbor, and I'm going to have to assemble it this way. Okay, now, if you're unfamiliar with the movement, it's a good idea to be very careful so as not to spill the wheels. If things are sticking, then a toothpick to make sure they're going to fall out of there, not stick. And we can take our plate apart. Okay. Strike train over here, chime train over here, time train right up the middle. I use my little jars to place these parts in. Okay. And we can remove each piece. There's center arbor.